Hello, everyone coming in. Just getting ready to share my screen and pull up the slides. Of course, naturally, my computer's being a little slow. Perfect. So thank you for everyone attending today's presentation. Of course, we're going to talk a bunch about heart health today. We're going to go over the mechanisms to which, of course, cholesterol is made in the body, some functional labs, and then we're also, of course, going to go into more applicable tips for how, what's going on? Okay, sorry, just checking the camera. The screen. So we're also going to go into some more applicable tips today on how to apply what we're discussing on cholesterol, blood pressure, heart health in our day-to-day diet and lifestyle. So let's get started. It's 48 hours. So I'm just going to ask everyone before we officially start, just to make sure you stay muted. Today's presentation is being recorded. So if you'd like to keep your cameras muted out of privacy, that is perfectly okay and acceptable, but we want to just make sure everybody is aware. So we have a few more just entering the space. It just turned 12. I think we have almost everybody. Okay, so Christina is also here. Christina is our owner from Functional Nutrition RX. So of course, Christina is going to be helping out today in going over these slides. So we're going to bounce back and forth. So I think mostly everybody's here. So let's get started. So the title of today's presentation is Getting to the Heart of the Matter, Nutrition Strategies for Heart Health. So this is going to be pretty broad encompassing of major factors that affect our heart. So we wanted to start with, if my computer will resume, there we go. Touching that February is American Heart Health Month, which is
not moving
oh,
the
it's not.
slides.
Oh, hold on, let me just reshare. It's showing on my, hold on, let's do that. Share. Perfect. Share. Okay, and then there we go. Is it presenting on you guys' end now?
Yes.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. So the reason why we wanted to time heart health in the month of February, as February has been deemed American Heart Health Month. So you're going to be seeing a lot more information about that. Of course, in the media, some fun facts is that your heart beats about 100,000 times a day and pumps nearly 2,000 gallons of blood through your body as it pumps through your heart. It's meant to explain how often that blood is going through the heart. The average heart is about the size of a fist and weighs less than a pound. So it's tiny but mighty, and it's our hardest working muscle in the body. Laughing can actually increase blood flow by about 20%, giving your heart a mini workout. Another fun fact that we like to touch on is your heart creates enough energy daily to drive a truck about 20 miles. So imagine what it can do for your lifetime. So we want to definitely treat our heart with a lot of love and respect, as heart disease is one of the #1 killers of America and of Americans, which is why we feel this topic is extremely important for us to go into today. So like I was saying earlier, for those who may have popped in just a little early, we're going to do an overview on heart health, touching upon, blood pressure, cholesterol, atherosclerosis, to name a few. We're going to go into different functional lab testing for you to bring to your provider, or we can always go over in session today how our practice can help you guys with accessing functional labs. And last, we will end with tangible tips for a healthy lifestyle. So some factors that can impact heart disease risk factors are, of course, having diabetes or prediabetes if you are a smoker, If you have altered lab values that we will go more into later in the presentation, if there's certain dietary habits that we're going to touch on in the diet, like using lots of processed saturated fats or a high trans fat diet, for an example. If we are physically inactive, we will also go through different genetic markers during today's presentation to help, as there are genetic family history aspects that can impact our risk for heart disease, especially if we have elevated blood pressure. And of course, our environment can impact risk for disease, specifically if you're living in an urban, high polluted environment, high stress environment. So some lab values to be aware of. Fairly recently, within the past, I would say 5 years, the blood pressure guidelines have changed to include this new elevated concept. So when measuring our blood pressure, we want to be aiming to be less than 120/80. However, in the past, what used to be considered more just like the yellow zone, which it's still kind of deemed that way, like yellow versus red, is having elevated blood pressure, which is now what considered elevated blood pressure, which used to be pre-hypertension, which is a value of your systolic blood pressure, which is the first number, over your diastolic, the bottom number. So if the pressure is anywhere above 120 to 129 for the systolic number, and or the diastolic, the bottom number, if less than 180, or it should say increase more than 180, excuse me, on that slide. It should say if it's more than 80, there's a higher risk for hypertension. So true hypertension stage 1 is when the systolic is 130 to about 139 and the diastolic is 80 to 89. High blood pressure stage 2, which typically when the doctor's trying to really discuss medication management at that time, is when the pressure is over 140 for the systolic or less than or over 90 for the diastolic. Nutrition can impact blood pressure, typically about a weight loss of about 5 to 10% total body weight. For some, that's about 5 pounds, can significantly impact our blood pressure along with other modifiable lifestyle factors.
I also, if you want to just jump back, just to kind of talk about why blood pressure is important, for those who might not really know, it's basically how well your heart is pumping blood and how easily blood is flowing through your arteries. And that's why it's very important. The top number, which is the systolic number, is the pressure when your heart beats. So if you see that number starting to get high, it's just showing that your heart is having a hard time beating, which is why these numbers are important. Whereas the bottom number is when the pressure when the heart rests between beats. So just to give you some background on that too, as to why we're looking at these numbers.
Thank you. That's perfect. And then next we're going into your lipid profile. So this is typically conducted at least once a year by your primary care physician.
Yeah, so basically these values, so it's interesting because different doctors have different values they want you to be at. And there are even other values that could be considered more optimal too. But these are good basic guidelines, which you see total cholesterol optimal is less than 200, normal is less than 250. But if you're looking at your blood work, if it's above 200, it's going to be flagged as high. And the values actually have changed over the years. A long time ago, before drug companies got involved, the numbers that were acceptable were even higher. So this is just a general guideline of what to look at and what you should really ask your doctor to at least be testing. We'll go a little bit more in depth with some more measurements to look at shortly, but you can also, if they don't run like the ratios on your blood work, you can calculate them yourself very easily by looking at that formula. The high sensitivity cardiac CRP is also a great measure for directly related to heart inflammation. And then these other two on the right side, the apolipoprotein B and lipoprotein A, you may not be as familiar with, but they're great tools to look at for heart health. And I think the next slide is going to go a little more in depth with both of them.
Absolutely.
Oh, and diabetes risk factor, sorry. At the bottom of that other slide, the risk factor, so goal is less than 100 for blood sugar, which is a single point in time measurement. hemoglobin A1C is 3-month average, less than 5.7 is good, but for us in the functional world, optimal ranges could be less than 90 to 93, depending on the lab, and less than 5.2. So once we start seeing someone who's maybe hemoglobin A1C is 5.6, 5.5, we might want to take a little bit more action as opposed to someone who's waiting for it to be a little higher.
Absolutely. And a lot of these markers, we try to trend, and you should be also trending with your provider to note, are they within range but going up? Are they out of range but steadily going down? So it's important to look at your timeline with regard to your measurement of these different lipid markers. So this, we want to go into a little bit more about the metabolism of cholesterol, just to give a good background. So think of chylomicrons. They're like these little fatty delivery trucks that transport fat from food that you eat into the bloodstream, and then different parts of the body for energy storage. So this process works kind of, envision yourself on the magic school bus. After eating foods that contain various fats or triglycerides, that's one of the smaller breakdown molecules of fats from food, it's absorbed in the small intestine and then repackaged into a way that could be delivered, meaning it has a protein that gets attached to the fat that gets broken down. So that protein can help, transport it around the body. So it enters the bloodstream so that it can be delivered into different tissues, and through that journey through the bloodstream and to various, musculoskeletal tissues or the liver, it starts to break down into different forms. So we're going to go more into what are these different forms, because that's what we're measuring in the lipid panel we were just touching upon, in a sense. So you have the bigger fatty molecule here on the left, the chylomicron. And when it's passing into the bloodstream, it's going to break down into smaller pieces into the chylomicron remnant, eventually over time to the VLDL, which gets measured. So VLDL can be a predictor that someone may end up having higher LDL cholesterol, but it can also break down and pass through. So your LDL cholesterol, like Christina was explaining, can break down into two different forms of LDL. There's lipoprotein A and lipoprotein B. So lipoprotein B, think like a big fluffy Michelin Man kind of particle. And that can be floating around your bloodstream and not really causing damage and isn't very sticky. However, lipoprotein A, this tiny, tight molecule, which is built up of 20% protein and 80% fat, or the lipid, so it's a little harder and firmer, can get stuck in different places in the body. And when that gets stuck by binding to the walls of the blood vessels and the arteries, it can cause that atherosclerosis, that hardening of the body. I always try to describe it like caramel, when caramel kind of hardens, right? It's that like sticky kind of texture. And that's kind of how you want to think of plaque buildup in the body. So lipoprotein A, this tight, tiny, dense molecule, it can be measured in your blood work, and can sometimes, most of the time we find it does get covered by insurance, but we do like to always have you guys call ahead and check in with your insurance or your lab that is, conducting your blood serum draw, to make sure that your lipoprotein A is fully covered. This can tell you more about your genetic risk of a higher cholesterol and atherosclerosis. So by the time you are 5, you usually have about your adult level of apolipoprotein A. So it's something you can monitor throughout your life. And with apolipoprotein A, it's modifiable, but to an extent, not as much as lipoprotein B. So eating, a healthy diet, following a healthy lifestyle, quitting smoking, losing weight or losing body fat, I should say, as it applies to you, regular exercise, reducing stress, lowering blood pressure, or medication management for some can be helpful in lowering lipoprotein A. We'll get a little more in depth on the lifestyle aspects. Lipoprotein B, however, is that big, fluffy, more Michelin Man sized molecule. Now, it can be high if someone is pregnant. So sometimes if you're testing your blood while pregnant, that is just a very important thing to note. If someone has elevated cholesterol, this is more modifiable by diet. So if someone is having a diet higher in saturated fats, sugars, they're more stressed, maybe they are having less fiber in their diet, for example, that's where you can see a little bit more apolipoprotein B building up in the body, nephrotic syndrome, so different kidney issues, high estrogen or high caffeine intake can all impact B. If someone has sepsis or liver damage or low estrogen, they might not have enough to build up that lipoprotein B. So it is a lipid transporter similar to regular LDL molecules, the VLDL molecules we showed you on previous slides. We want it to be between about a 66 to 133 milligrams per deciliter for men, or 60 to 117 for women. And then, of course, like we said, we touched a little bit more on the lifestyle factors. So we could see here, if someone has high HDL cholesterol, think happy, our quote unquote, I don't like calling it good cholesterol anymore after a recent webinar we sat in on, because HDL cholesterol, we want it to be elevated, but to an extent. We want our HDL, our quote unquote better cholesterol, to be between about, say, 50 to no higher than about 100. Usually, if you see that someone's HDL is starting to go over 100, 110, 120, their bodies may be mounting some kind of an immune response, as your HDL cholesterol is like your police officer of the bloodstream that, when in a healthy range, actually helps to scavenge and grab that LDL cholesterol, that not so great cholesterol, and move it through the body. So you could see here on the right that LDL cholesterol, another way to remember is people think L lousy, H happy, right? LDL cholesterol can build up that plaque around the arteries, causing that narrowing, making it harder to deliver nutrients and oxygen, for example, iron through the body. So when it comes to inflammation now, right? So inflammation is this very hot topic nowadays, and it's very important to touch upon, as it's not just about the plaque or the cholesterol, it's about this kind of like the soup in the bloodstream, right? The culmination of factors that are going on in the individual's lifestyle. So if someone has insulin resistance, or AKA they have more sugars or insulin, circulating in their bloodstream, it can cause more of that hardening of the blood vessels. But picture sugar is like that glass-like molecule, that crystalline molecule that can scrape at the blood vessels and cause that immune system to need to now react and send different white blood cells, macrophages, etc., to that site. And now you're starting to see this inflammatory response. So now they're trying to bind and patch up that scrape, right? Almost like a scab, causing that hardening. And that's where different lipoprotein A particles can get trapped up in that and cause more of that narrowing of the arteries. So you can also see here, this is another diagram just depicting what molecules really can make up that plaque. So this is part why we want to measure certain things like our C-reactive protein, our LDL cholesterol, and of course, every annual basic lab panel typically includes a CBC and a metabolic panel to tell you more about your immune system activation as well. So you could just see here in this diagram as how this plaque can build up.
So these are additional markers that you can look for in your blood work. And I think we're going to put together a little cheat sheet and email it out to you guys afterwards regarding blood markers to request from doctors, or they could potentially be done in our office. So as Amanda mentioned, the lipoproteins, the way to think about them is they're little vehicles that carry fats and cholesterols around your body. So they're little transporters. The lipoprotein A is more sticky, and that is highly more genetic. So when a doctor may say to you, oh, there's nothing you can do for your cholesterol, it's genetic, you should really then request to get the lipoprotein A done, so that you can actually have the data to see if it truly is more genetic than dietary. And then you can also look at the apoprotein B, because that will be highly influenced by diet and lifestyle, and you can reduce that number more easier than the lipoprotein A through those measures. Then looking at homocysteine, this is another easy blood work to monitor. And it's all, as Amanda said, monitoring it yearly just to see where the trend is. Is it trending up? Because then there's something that you can do about it. It's an amino acid that can build up in your blood vessels and cause damage and blood clots. And it's also linked to a B12 deficiency and methylation, which is a whole way we process nutrients. So sometimes also taking methylated B vitamins can be helpful when this homocysteine level is elevated. High sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein, as I mentioned, I think before, is a good marker to measure inflammation as a key driver in your heart health. There is also regular CRP, which is more generalized inflammation in the body, non-specific to anything. So both of those together could be good markers to look at yearly just to see where your CRP is at, although the regular CRP could be influenced by an infection. If you have a toothache, tooth infection, that can be elevated for that reason in that one time. So that's why we like to look at the high sensitivity CRP as well in regards to heart health. The ADMA, which is asymmetric dimethylarginine, that is a great indicator of nitric oxide production, which plays a role in your blood pressure and blood flow. So high levels of that marker can indicate an impaired blood flow and not optimal potential for blood pressure. So it's good to also monitor that level. There's foods that you can eat to help reduce or increase nitric oxide levels if needed. And then we have the genetic tests. So these are a little harder. You can get some of these run easily by doctors. I believe the ApoE is easy, the MTHFR is easy, but you can also we run a test by 3x4 genetics that would have this information in there. You could also run a 23andMe and then get the raw data and upload them for free into various other software markers to see these markers. But basically, ApoE is a good indicator of increase of heart disease and immune responses, and I guess cholesterol levels. So if you know your genetic marker for that specific SNP, then you can monitor and change your diet and lifestyle to match your needs. MTHFR is a methylation marker, which basically you can think of as detoxification. If you have the positive marker for that, you have a more difficult time detoxifying different things in the body. And then some of these other markers are also linked to heart health. One of them is linked to if a statin would work good. So these are just other markers that can be helpful. But the key takeaway here is that LDL particle size, the ApoB, high sensitivity, C-reactive protein, and even triglycerides paint a better picture of your cardiac risk and heart health than LDL alone. So most of the time we're only seeing this LDL number when we should really get all these other values to assess the total risk of heart health.
Thank you, Christina. That was super helpful. So these are all tests that, like Christina said, we're going to send you a cheat sheet after today's presentation. So you can go with this information to your provider, or some of these we can also help you to run as well. The calcium score is something that usually you get done though with your cardiologist. So the calcium score is often used to see, all right, how much or what percentage of the arteries, the total area of calcium deposits, and how dense that calcium is built up in the arteries. A score of 0 means there's no calcification, relatively no risk, right? If it's 100 to 300, there's moderate plaque deposits building up and a relatively higher risk for heart disease, heart attack over time in the next 3 to 5 years. However, over 300 means that there's more extensive disease and it's considered a much higher severe risk. So sometimes individuals use this as a determining feature in their treatment to know how far it's progressed and how aggressive they want to treat their heart disease. Also, C-reactive protein, like Christina was saying, if your insurance does not cover the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is the more accurate indicator for heart health, as it's not modified by if like Christina said, have like an infection in the mouth or some kind of cold or flu-like symptoms. The C-reactive protein measures your just total body inflammation. So when you get that, and if it's above 1 for functional labs or 3 in terms of providers, your provider would consider a 3 or above more severe. However, we would want to jump on it if it's a 1 or above, especially. It just means you need to dive a little deeper and say, okay, what could be driving this potential inflammation? So the reason why we want to talk about all of this is this all kind of compiles into a much bigger picture called metabolic syndrome. I feel that metabolic syndrome got a lot of attention a few years back, but hasn't been getting as much attention as it should. So metabolic syndrome is a conglomerate of symptoms. So it's any of the 3 symptoms I'm about to mention: a blood pressure higher than 130 over 85, a fasting blood sugar over 100. We still like to be cautious. So if you have like a 99, a 96, over 100, it can show early signs of glucose intolerance for that fasting blood sugar, which is usually taken at least once a year. A waist circumference, if we're male, greater than 40 inches, or if we're a female, greater than 35 inches. We're going to get to in the next slide what this waist circumference really has to do with this bigger picture. If our HDL is under 40 for a woman, or under 40 for a man, or under 50 for a woman, that's also one of the symptoms of metabolic syndrome. And lastly is triglycerides over 150. So this cluster of symptoms is important because it means that the body is more stressed. It's working harder than it really should have to for day-to-day vital functions, and it can increase risk for other more severe issues like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, stroke, more life-threatening situations. So it's important to be aware of not just our symptoms, but how they cluster together in the bigger picture. This is part of how we play a role in your nutrition counseling to help to put these pieces together and come up with a treatment regimen that's unique to you. So if you think you might have metabolic syndrome, what does this mean? You definitely want to talk with your provider, especially it's associated with insulin resistance. So you want to continue to, test your hemoglobin A1C if you're not already. If you're just testing your glucose and your fasting glucose is, trending over 100 or in that 95, 96 area even, right? Ask for that hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month average of your blood sugars. And you want to consider, sometimes we like to run a fasting insulin to also understand the degree of insulin resistance in the body, as if that fasting insulin is higher, it means your pancreas might be having to work harder to secrete that insulin to then help that sugar therefore enter the cell. So it could mean that there's some difficulty at the cellular receptor area, meaning that the sugar is not, opening the lock to get into the cell to be used as energy, and therefore just pooling up in the bloodstream, causing that potential damage, that scraping at the blood vessel, causing that inflammation, that atherosclerosis, that hardening of the blood vessels. So it is a little bit of a puzzle, but the biggest thing that we want you guys to see is all of these factors come together to influence our health and longevity, right? And we all just want to be on this earth as happy and healthy as possible for as long as possible. So definitely following up with your registered dietitian, your primary care provider, your cardiologist regarding any medical management of these symptoms or syndromes. And metabolic syndrome can be treated with diet and lifestyle. So part of why metabolic syndrome has that waist circumference component, it's not about weight, right? It's about our body is made up, our weight is mostly made up of bone, our liquids like our blood, our hydration, right, our muscle, and our body fat. 3 out of the 4, we want to be heavy, strong, and take up space. But that component of body fat, right? How it is placed on our body is super important. So visceral fat. So when the metabolic syndrome criteria was made, they're getting at the concept of visceral fat. So visceral fat is a specific type of fat that is more metabolically active than, say, the fat on, the back of my arm, say, right? The fat in the midsection, right, by our waist circumference, it's around our organs, as you could see in these pictures. It's kind of suffocating for those organs, right? So it puts more stress on them and makes them have to work harder. So it's going to put us at a greater risk for metabolic syndrome, right? The other components of metabolic syndrome. So part of our practice, or if you have access to this at gyms or health clinics that you have access to, is using like a body composition scale. We utilize InBody, which is accurate enough to be used in an NIH or CDC funded study. It's about 98% accurate. So we often use it to trend your body fat and your muscle mass. It shows you how you segment your muscle throughout your body and your body fat throughout your body. But the bigger reason why I wanted to highlight it is this section here. If you can see my cursor, it says visceral fat. So when visceral fat is starting to go above a 10, we're at that higher risk for disease. So this is something that you can measure and should be measured at least once a year. Other testing is a thyroid panel. So our thyroid influences the speed of our heart, right? So if someone's thyroid is altered, they might have higher blood pressure or heart rate. It can impact LDL receptors in your liver and affect the rate of cholesterol, so higher cholesterol. So this is part why women, when we go through menopause, have a higher risk for heart disease, because our fat can sometimes move more from like the hips and buttocks when estrogen deduces and moves more upwards towards our midsection. But also part of this is women, when we go through menopause, have a higher risk for thyroid issues and like Hashimoto's disease and autoimmune conditions. So you might see cholesterol start to creep up at that time as well. There's slower liver processing if we have slower thyroid. Think your thyroid impacts the rate of everything in your body. So if you're going hypothyroid, things are just moving slower. There's decreased elasticity in the blood vessels. So we do find it important to get a thyroid panel done each year, and to consider a deeper testing more than just TSH, but looking at other markers like your T3, your T4, just to name 2. And then let's see. So this is more about stress. So stress and heart health, right? We all hear about it and we all know stress is bad, but why is stress bad for me and my heart? It can also impact our thyroid too. So I'll get into heart in the next slide, but with our thyroid, when we're stressed, we're going to be pumping out more cortisol. So you could see here, this HPA axis is more like your stressed out side of the body, versus when you're calm and you're not stressed, you are activating your HPT axis, right? So your body's able to make more of these thyroid hormones like T3 and T4, which are your more active hormones. However, when you're stressed, your body's going to pump out more cortisol, which suppresses that TSH, T4, or T3. So when someone's very stressed, you could sometimes see a lower TSH or a lower T4 or a lower T3. Also, when you're stressed, you use other nutrients that are also needed to help make thyroid hormones. So if the body's prioritizing making stress hormones with those nutrients, they're not really as available if they're not coming in excess to make those other hormones. So it's a constant stress can impact our thyroid production. It can cause a diminished thyroid production, hypothyroid, and it's a sensitive feedback loop that in the end ends up causing less of that T3 hormone to be released, and therefore that is our most active thyroid hormone. Stress also impacts heart health. in that acute mental stress activates that autonomic nervous system, like we were talking about, increases cortisol, which then, of course, can impact your heart rate, your blood pressure, causing that elevated blood pressure. But also there's more of an inflammatory activation. So when we're stressed, you're going to see more of these cytokines. You've probably heard this term a lot during COVID. Those are just other inflammatory markers that you can measure in the body, and it causes that greater activation of the immune system and higher risk for that plaque buildup. So now we're going to get more into the fun stuff, the diet, the how do I apply this information? But we hope that you got some good information out of the lab aspects. It's fun to touch on. So stress management, right? We just touched a little bit on stress. So we all, here, just don't stress, right? I have some patients that laugh. They're like, what does that mean, right? But we want to take an active role in our health and take responsibility for our stress. So ways to de-stress, of course, like set a time. Sunday night, I do a foot bath with some, what's it called? What's the term? Why am I forgetting the term right now? Epsom salt or different essential minerals, right? Getting time outdoors, especially grounding outside, scheduling a massage. You got to take responsibility for your stress. We are not just a product of our environment, but rather we are, taking responsibility to buffer that stress and unwind. Different supplements that can be helpful include magnesium glycinate before bed, 5-HTP, and different adaptogens. However, when, focusing or wanting to include more adaptogens in your lifestyle, you definitely want to work with the registered dietitians, as different ones call for different situations and different cycling or dosing. So we have our USDA MyPlate here. So this is just a great general way to describe building our plate and getting the right nutrients in proportion to help us combat risk for heart disease and metabolic syndrome. So if you can try to make your plate 1/4 the protein, typically about the size of your hand, gone is the day of the palm, depending on our situation, but for the most part, the hand versus the palm. We want to aim for protein that swims, flies, or grows from the ground. Animals with 4 legs that walk on land, we want to try to consider getting grass-fed. Grass-fed's better than just grass finish. Versus just our feedlot meat, because it can impact the fat profile of the meat and make it more inflammatory if it's feedlot. But if it's a grass-fed option, especially if organic, it's more likely to have omega-3s, which are more heart healthy and less of those processed saturated fats. Carbohydrate foods, a lot of us, America has a very anti-carb mindset. And carbs are not the devil. Carbs are one of our major macronutrients. It means we need it in a large supply. We need it to make energy. So carbs are our fruits, our vegetables, our starchy vegetables like peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, most squash, right? Beans, legumes, even though they have protein, they're mostly a starch. So about 1/5 for most of us is a good amount. And then non-starchy vegetables, eat as much as you can, as long as your stomach does not hurt and that you're also having water to help that fiber move through your body. And we're going to get a little bit more into the fibers. This is just a great way to lay out.
I like to say, well, I like to give a minimum for the non-starchy vegetables, saying at least 2 cups at lunch and dinner, as opposed to just saying get as much as you can.
I agree. Definitely trying to get at least 2 cups or like 2 fists is a good way to frame that out. Water, I miss the water, but yes, keep plenty of water to move that fiber through the body. So some of this might sound generic, but I think we would be really remiss to not touch on is high fat, especially high fat processed dairy versus grass fed. Or local, right? Local grass-fed, processed meats, fatty meats like filet mignon. Yes, filet mignon is a fatty meat. Strip steak, right? Fried foods, fast foods, baked goods. They're laden with processed saturated fats and sugars that can clog our arteries. Triglycerides also play a part in this role. It's a different kind of fat, similar to cholesterol that we measure in our lipid panel every year, that can also cause that sticking to the arteries. So think of that as more of like your sugary fatty foods like candies and sodas, foods made from white flour, especially processed bleached white flour, the saturated and trans fats, but think more of like your pastries, your donuts, alcohol, of course. When we see very high triglycerides, you sometimes you think soda, sometimes you think beer. It depends. It depends on what's going on, right? Overeating of portions, that's another common high trigger for high triglycerides. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and I wanted to add in, a lot of people do ask if foods high in cholesterol increase their cholesterol levels, and that is not the case. It's mostly, it's the foods high in saturated fats, high in oxidized fats, things like that, as opposed to the actual cholesterol in the food.
agreed. Completely agree. So guys, have your shrimp. Don't stay away from shrimp because it has cholesterol. It's a nice lean protein. So processed and hydrogenated vegetable oils, or just hydrogenated oils in general, seed oils, right? This is why coffee creamers are getting a lot of attention on social media, if you guys haven't seen already, right? Limit those seed oils as much as you can. The high oleic sunflower oil you can get away with. That's like the exception. Ideally, though, we want olive oil all day, every day. No, I'm kidding. Just make it your main fat, for the love of God. Olive oil is so, so good for you, not just from the types of fats, but the antioxidants in it. If you're cooking, though, it goes back and forth in what I see in literature about oxidizing olive oil. So if you're going above about 400 degrees or so, 350, 400, try to go for avocado oil. That's also laden in heart healthy fats.
Yeah, I agree. Get concerned about oxidation. Like you said, the smoke point is 350 to 400 about for olive oil. Also, when you're buying your olive oil, just to point out, you do want a dark glass container that's smaller. You don't want the huge Costco like jug that kind of stays open a little bit to air, because air, light, heat all will oxidize your fats.
Amen. Yeah, that's why like cold pressed, you're going to see a higher price point for, because when it's cold and similar to higher quality juicers, heat can just denature antioxidants, right? So olive oil is super important in the diet, and high sodium foods. It's not so much about, everyone has unique sodium needs based on your activity and how you sweat and your hydration. And also if you're taking in, potassium rich foods as well, right? But you just want to be aware that we're not taking in a lot of that processed high salt food, as most Americans, we only get 11% really from the salt shaker. Most of that salt comes from processed foods, which aside from the sodium, are really going to have more of those refined sugars, saturated fats, potential for trans fats, which is part, like the bigger picture is just in general, those foods are not the greatest to have. Like we mentioned earlier, the high saturated fat foods, the feedlot meats. So if the animal eats a diet rich in nutrients, we are what we eat. And it's the same for those animals, that the type of fat that their body is made out of is going to be more omega-3 rich, those heart healthy fats, when they have a healthier lifestyle, healthier diet. But there is a difference between grass-fed and grass-finished. Grass-finished just means they ate more grass towards the end of their life. I forget the exact time frame. However, grass-fed is that they've been fed a predominantly grass diet throughout most of their life. But just note, with grass-fed, grass-finished, it's a little technical, and it doesn't mean that they got to be pasture raised or free range as well, which will also enhance the nutrient quality of the meat itself. Other saturated fat foods you want to be weary of. I mean, coconut oil is not the devil. It's not your primary oil, right? Olive oil is. Use that for baking or as a healthier alternative. Lard or Crisco, you want to go for when you have your butter, like a Kerrygold, like a grass-fed butter. And when you see Kerrygold, and I say that because that's a brand a lot of us know, that Irish butter, it's that yellow, it's that golden color, because it's richer in not just omega-3s, but vitamin A and vitamin E, when it is grass-fed. And then of course the higher sugars. We've gone into the sugars already, but a good rule of thumb for us is it says, no more than 9 teaspoons per day. It's for or less than 36 grams per day for men, or 9 teaspoons. For women, less than 24 grams per day, or 6 teaspoons of specifically added sugar. That doesn't mean like our fruit, but really that's set by the World Health Organization. You want to keep that as low as you can, to be honest, and try to get your sugar from natural and processed sources. Christina, am I missing anything, you think?
No,
No?
I like
All
it.
right. Yay, rock on. And then saturated fat, right? So there is a little conundrum right now with saturated fat and heart health, right? So saturated fat, when it's more so, it's traditionally linked to LDL cholesterol. Is it more causative or correlative is where people keep going back and forth with. So recent studies suggest saturated fats impact on heart health depend on the context, right? It's not necessarily that it's higher fat dairy, like we're saying, or higher fat meat, but it's the quality and the processing of that meat. So if it's more oxidized saturated fats, if it's from whole minimally processed foods, they're not going to pose as much of a risk. So at the end of the day, it's just trying to eat as, I hate just saying clean, because what does that mean? But knowing where your food's coming from, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I also always was taught that good quality saturated fats can also raise your HDL, and so they can kind of improve your LDL HDL ratios.
Very good point, right? Like, what was it? Back in like the 80s, it was like this war on fat. And so like if you don't have enough fat in your body and you're eating very, very low fat, it's needed to make cholesterol. And sometimes if your cholesterol is too low, right? Like some people are over medicated on statins and their cholesterol is like 100. Well, no wonder their testosterone is where it is, because you need that to make hormones. So everything in balance, right? So fiber is king for any kind of diet. I swear by fiber, because if you're eating high fiber foods, you're feeding your gut, you're helping to have a diverse flora in your microbiome, which impacts so much. But also high fiber foods tend to also be minimally processed and higher in other phytonutrients as well. So fiber can act as like a netting almost to trap cholesterol and help to pass it through the body so that we're not really even absorbing it into that whole system like we talked about earlier. Fiber also can regulate sugar in terms of our blood sugar spikes. It can slow down blood sugar spikes, but also similar to cholesterol, help to trap it and move it through the body and not have it absorb as much. Fiber helps to support healthy blood pressure by helping to reduce inflammation, and it aids in weight management, as I call fiber nature's Ozempic, especially when we're getting enough healthy fats and protein, because one, fiber feeds the bugs in our guts that help to make those incretin hormones, which our gut and our brain are connected, right? Those incretin hormones tell our brain, hey, I'm full, I've had enough carbs, I'm good. But also fiber helps with weight management because it moves food, typically, depending on the types of fiber, slower through the body. So you're feeling fuller longer. And, that's part of how these medications work. You feel fuller longer. So then therefore we don't eat as much and our calories are lower, right? So fiber works the same way. So we might as well get more bang for our buck nutritionally and fill up on a lot of these, great rainbow of fruits and vegetables, because we'll also get in more vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, versus just feeling too full to even eat, if that makes sense. I do think there's a time and a place for those medications, but I don't want to bypass a good healthy diet, if that makes any sense. Women should aim for about 25 grams of fiber per day, and men 38 grams per day. But higher the better, as long as it's not causing you to constipate or have different GI issues go on. That's where you want to work with a dietitian one-on-one to find the right mix for you. We can do a whole presentation on fiber and how to add that more into our diet and the sources. Maybe that's something for next month. But easy ways to add more fiber is choose whole grains over refined grains. I'm a bigger fan though of make your beans or your lentils, your starch on that 1/4 of your plate. Eat fruits and vegetables with the skin on it. load up on berries and quinoas, berries and kiwis. Yes, quinoa too, but kiwis, as those are some of our higher fiber fruits. And just be aware, like look at it from time to time, just look at how much fiber is in your food and see what it adds up to. Could just be one day of just backlogging into, Chronometer. What did I take in today? And seeing. So yes, so exactly. So Christina had touched upon this earlier, because this is a big question we get a lot, is cholesterol in food. Does it matter? Does it not? So we already said it doesn't matter that much. It's a very, very small percent that matters. So that's why it was taken off of the nutrient list of concern. So please, for the love of God, if you have eggs in your grocery store, eat your eggs. Don't not eat your eggs. The price factor is a whole other thing, but eggs are not bad foods for us. So egg yolks can contain cholesterol, but they also can contain 5 grams of saturated fat, right? So like we were saying about grass-fed and grass-finished meats, if the chickens, right, they're pasture raised and organic, they're going to have more omega-3s, vitamin A, vitamin E. So that's why you have that deep orange horizon colored yolk versus like an Eggland's Best, which is like a feedlot chicken, unfortunately, that's higher in saturated fat, those yolks, we're going to have a higher risk for heart disease. So it's not the egg, it's the quality of the egg. We do recommend, though, out of caution, especially if you're someone with like an apolipoprotein 4 genetic trait, or you have a higher apolipoprotein A, like we touched upon, to really try to limit to 6 egg yolks per week. Egg whites are cool. They're just pure protein. Egg yolk is really where the fat comes from. So combine whole eggs with egg whites. And also, if you're trying to up your muscle and decrease your body fat, it's a great way to keep your protein high and your overall calories lower, because then you're taking those calories from the fat in the yolk and putting that to the side, and now using your calories for more protein. And egg whites are the highest bioavailable form of protein, meaning you're going to absorb most of the protein that's in it, where we don't always absorb everything that we eat. Shellfish, part of the Mediterranean diet, eat the seafood. It's great lean proteins. The fattier fish like salmon and tuna, you want to eat like 2 to 3 times a week, more so for omega-3 reasons. But your shellfish do contain cholesterol, so don't eat it all day, every day, but try to sprinkle it throughout your diet in a balanced way with chicken, turkey, whitefish, fatty fish, eggs, just to name a few. As you can tell, we do promote a mixed diet of a plant-based diet with adequate protein. So it's not carnivore versus vegan, it's harmony, it's yin and yang, it's the Mediterranean diet. So that's why you're going to see increase in healthy fats here on the left. This is just a summary of some other healthy fats in our diet. Having about 1 ounce of unsalted nuts per day, unsalted raw nuts, right? Per day, specifically like walnuts, can lower LDL cholesterol, risk for stroke, and hypertension. And you want to fill up on fiber from fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans and legumes, whole grains like oats. Put protein powder in your oatmeal, please. So, so you're not having too much of a blood sugar spike, though, to keep your fiber higher. What's the deal with cheese? Okay, so cheese is a thing. Not really, but you just got to know what's in your cheeses, right? So cheeses are different. So feta cheese, for example, and goat cheese, there's more monounsaturated fat. That's the same type of fat that's in walnuts, and olive oil that's super heart healthy. It's that like liquidy, watery fat, right? Versus that like hard at room temperature fat, like a coconut oil, like a saturated fat, right? Low fat cottage cheese is great, low fat ricotta, or like other lower fat cheeses like a Pecco Romano, a Locatelli, a sharp cheddar cheese. Sharp or low moisture just means lower fat typically. And you can compare, you can look and see, all right, let's compare the low fat to the high fat. Typically, I do find that the calcium is similar, but if you have a common brand that you like to get, compare it and just see, do the nutrients get stripped based on how this particular brand is processing it? And also you could see, are they adding sugar in? Typically, I don't see that often, that they bump up the sugar when they cut out the fat. I don't see that. So I do find that to be a myth, but everyone buys different brands and things. So it's just something to be careful of, and know what's in your food. Fresh is always best when it comes to mozzarella. And then what's not so smart is the more processed cheeses. So when you get the American cheeses that are going to have about 25% of the recommended daily intake of saturated fat in it, right? Cheese in general is a higher salt food based on how cheese is made. So you want to be aware of that and your hydration around it. Pasteurizing the cheese can process the nutrients in it. So you want to be aware where your cheese is coming from and making the best choices for you. Brie and other super, super soft cheeses, just think dietary fat is soft and squishy, right? So those soft and squishier cheeses are going to be typically higher in fat. So you just want to know what that fat is, and it's typically a saturated fat. A serving size of cheese is typically about 1 slice or 1 ounce, which is a pair of dice, just to name an example. So we're all, for the most part, Long Islanders here. And who doesn't love a nice bacon, egg, and cheese in the morning? Or so this is like a good alternative option to a bacon, egg, and cheese, is doing like whole grain bread with 3 egg whites, tomato, and a third to, I would say, about a half, depending on your portion needs, of avocado. However, I do still love my egg sandwiches. So maybe I'm going to swap the bagel for 2 slices of whole grain or sourdough bread, right? Maybe I'm going to do 1 egg and about a half a cup of whites with some sharp cheddar cheese and some turkey bacon or some Applegate turkey sausage, and maybe some avocado and or spinach and tomato on there. So that's how we can make some Heart Smart Long Island themed breakfast, right? Speaking of coming from New York, we love our pizza, right? So we're never saying don't have pizza again because of all the processed cheese and refined carbs and fats in it. But maybe if you are going to have it, try to do, because if I just eat 1 slice, I'm going to need to eat 2. That's not going to fill me, right? So maybe instead I'm just going to have 1 slice with like a chicken salad, like a chicken Caesar salad, dressing on the side, or a healthy swap for the dressing. And instead of a soda, maybe like an unsweetened tea. So this is how we can have the best of both worlds, but still have, compromises for our goals. So we could still achieve our goals, but then still have some of our favorite foods along the way. Now, we all have some of those favorite foods that we don't want to part with at all as well. So sometimes it's not just about building up like the vegetables and the protein around it. Sometimes it's just about portioning, right? So what's a great swap for Ben and Jerry's ice cream? If you're really craving that flavor, right? It could be other brands like a Nick's ice cream using a Ninja Creamy, or making a nice cream or a cottage cheese ice cream, right? But sometimes if that swap just doesn't do it for you, maybe we just focus on the portion, right? We bring it down from the pint to a third or 2/3 of a cup, but just staying mindful of our portioning along the way, especially when summer barbecues come up. Some back to basics is, choosing better beverages. I think we've all seen the whole sugar and beverages thing, but just a good tip is, when you're reading the label for sugar, remember those added sugar numbers we talked about. Men no more than 36 grams a day, women no more than 25. If you want to know what that looks like tangibly in teaspoons, divide that number by 4. So if, for example, I'm looking at that Snapple peach iced tea that I know a lot of people love, 39 grams of sugar. If I divide that by 4, that's 9.75 teaspoons of sugar. So sometimes it's worth it to make the compromise to say, maybe I'm going to get the unsweetened tea. I'm going to make an unsweetened peach tea. Maybe I'll just add a teaspoon of sugar to it because it's better than 9, right? Or like a little lemon to it, right? It's all about perspective to what we're presently taking in, and how can I just make a little bit better of a choice each time. Next is some better options. So of course, like the unsweetened teas, unsweetened homemade brew tea is the best. But if you could do like a Pure Life unsweetened, or an Honest tea unsweetened, hint, a flavored seltzer, flavored water, Zivia. There's some other ones on the market now, like Poppy and Schwoon, and what's the other one? Olipop, I think, right? Lemon, True Lemon has a bunch of different flavors, along with Ultima, Jigsaw as well. So these are other ways to flavor your water, your food. You could do frozen fruit and herb infusions as well. That's one of the other low sugar ways to add flavor to your beverage. Alcohol is a hot topic because the information's coming out more and more about it being a Schedule I carcinogen, but it's also very provoking of our triglycerides. It's loaded in triglycerides. So the American guidelines are for men no more than 2 drinks per day, women no more than 1. However, a functional way to think about it is less is best. So note these are your alcohol portions here on the screen. And just some other ways to do it is these are just some healthier mocktails you can make. There's so many recipes out there. So if you got questions, let us know. You're starting to see more mocktails on the menu, but you just want to use caution about the sugar that's going in the ones that we get at the restaurant, and we can ask them to tweak. If you know what, you're like, man, I'm just going to cut back. I'm not cutting out, but I'm going to cut back. These are just some better options that we could take in, like a dirty martini. We got some olives at least, right? No, I'm kidding. Vodka soda, homemade margarita mojito. We're asking for like I hate this term, but a skinny mojito or skinny margarita when you're out, where they're not adding all the syrups and the extra sugars. Red wine, because at least you're getting some of the phytonutrients, just to name. I've had some college students I've counseled do spike smoothies because they're like, at least I'm getting electrolytes and fiber and other nutrients in with it. But I'm like, you're not going to absorb as much of it. But okay, at least they're taking in other nutrients. So a spike smoothie can be an option. But sauces are another common culprit. So these are just some great swaps to use instead of sour cream, Greek yogurt. Swap out the shelf-stable salad dressing for the refrigerated. French onion ranch dip for guacamole and hummus. These are just some other brands, and here on this screen are some brands that you can refer to. Another one that's not on here is Noble Made. That's another helpful brand to use to, get saucy, but not too saucy.
And then we wanted to talk about a couple supplements that could be helpful for heart health. As Amanda mentioned, fiber is super important. Some people do struggle with getting the amount through food, so you can always supplement with a fiber source supplement. I really like psyllium husks because they do sequester bile naturally. You can also get an artichoke extract in supplement form too. So those are some ones for fiber that are good. The psyllium husks you can get ground up to a powder. The actual full seed of the husk is a little harder to swallow, but some people don't mind it as much. I wanted to touch upon beet root juice and powders. They're great for people with higher blood pressure. And also they can work they work as a vasodilator. So they kind of loosen up and open your blood vessels. They're great for also pre-workout to help get the blood flow going as well. But there are some studies, as I mentioned in here, there's studies that do show that they do reduce blood pressure and they have a lowering effect on blood pressure. So that could be helpful. Berberine is also helpful for cholesterol levels. It's helpful for blood sugar levels and some very low in research. In research, it shows very not significant, but very low levels of weight loss. Like we're talking maybe somewhere between 1 to 5 pounds total when you're using it. But I like to use it with people for cholesterol and blood sugar regulation. You can use 500 milligrams 3 times a day. I would just be careful if you're already on a medication that lowers your blood sugar. This may lower it too much. So always take caution when adding supplementation in, asking your doctor or better yet, your dietitian, because we do have a lot of training in supplementation and nutrient interactions with medications. Curcumin I love as an anti-inflammatory supplement. You can use it in spice in turmeric or get a supplementation of it with some black pepper added to enhance the absorption. And there are different probiotics that the strains are specific to heart health, specifically lowering blood pressure, lowering LDL, lowering triglycerides, and promoting weight loss. So I mentioned some of the specific probiotics in those little parentheses. This one in the picture is one that has those in it. But you can always, if you have a FullScript account, you can actually search in the catalog for these specific strains and see what comes up. Or if you're working with a dietitian, ask us and we can give you one specific to your needs. Then the next slide, we're talking about fish oil. I love fish oil. If you cannot consume, I say 1 to 2 servings of a fatty fish a week, supplement with the fish oil, get the omega-3s in through the supplement, sorry. So you want to look at fish oil, you just want to be careful with, because the cheaper ones that aren't good quality could be an oxidized oil, as we mentioned before, with oxidation, because it is an unsaturated fat. So I like Nordic Naturals because they do actually measure something called the TOTOX, its total oxidation value. So there, in the United States, they say under 26 is acceptable. And usually Nordic Naturals ranges is 5 to 14, and they do list that on their website for the different products. I like the Ultimate Omega as an over-the-counter choice. I like anywhere from 1.5 to 3 grams a day, which that might seem high to some, to help lower cholesterol and increase HDL, shown in research, by about 20%. I would just be careful if you are on blood thinners or any of those types of concerns with the fish oil. And then just to touch upon, there are prescription strength. They are made a little differently than your natural fish oils you found in the store. The natural ones are triglyceride form, whereas the prescription ones have more of an alcohol base to them. So they're just a little different, and you need a higher dose to get the same amount as one that's over the counter. So if you are paying a high amount for prescription fish oil, you can get half the dose and absorb it better over the counter, and they're usually cheaper.
Amen. We can't not talk about exercise. So of course, we know exercise is great for our cardiovascular health. That's why it's called cardio. So it makes our heart pump, it helps our blood vessels get stronger. So take advantage of nice weather when we have it. Should be starting to come out a little more start of March. Be careful with ice and snow, but we adapt and overcome here. So we can go indoors to the gym, take advantage of it when it's not too snowy, too icy. Or I've had some patients, I know, they leave their wallet away, but they go and walk the mall, Home Depot, Target, etc. Utilize boardwalks, great, parks and spaces. We're very lucky here when the weather's nicer, but find a gym, build a community. The gym is where you can meet really good people, or just get some self-care alone time. Buddy up if you need some help for accountability, but if your buddy can't make it, still go. Swim, or even just try to tread water if you can, it depends on the state or the situation that we're in, but do something to push yourself a little bit each day. That's the biggest thing. Within reason and what your doctor recommends for you. You want to aim for at least 150 minutes of moderate cardiovascular aerobic activity per week, which is, something that you can maintain at a pace that you can have a conversation. Or vigorous activity, though, you could aim for at least 75 minutes per week. So it's either 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous activity a week. Vigorous is usually indicated that if you're having a conversation with somebody and you try to string together about 7 words or 2 sentences and you have to inhale a bunch, that's typically a sign that you're in the vigorous state of activity. And then just a moment of perspective that, sometimes some of us were maybe just gathering information that we're doing all of this already. It just confirms that, hey, I'm in a great spot. For some of us, we might be in a different spot in our path that we're trying to initiate a change and say, I know this information, but I got to apply it, right? So these are just some good quotes that we've seen over time and so if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? I have to tell myself, if I want, my workout regimen, if I want to get stronger, if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? If not now, then when am I going to do it? Right? So many people are like, I'll just do it next year. I'll just do it next year. But if I start now, it'll be easier next year. Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. Your health is your investment, not an expense. Pay now or pay later, right? And you can't enjoy wealth if you're not in good health. Health is the foundation of everything. So we want to see if anybody has any questions at all from this conversation. No, okay. So if you guys do though, and it's private and you want to email us on the side, that's totally okay. We will send out that cheat sheet we mentioned. And most importantly, we want to thank you for your time. Thank you for coming, and we hope you have an awesome day.
Hi,
Right.
my name's Catherine. My daughter's name is coming up, Anna, but I
Um,
just wanted to thank you. This was excellent.
Oh,
I
great.
really got a lot of information out of it. I just had a quick question about the eggs. What do you think about the egg whites from containers?
Oh, good question. Like the plastic in the
Yeah.
container. The
No,
flour.
just instead of using, you said use one yolk, but then you buy the carton of egg white container in the container.
Absolutely. Christina and I were just talking about this yesterday. We were talking about egg prices and we were saying,
Yeah,
yeah, right. It's a good swap that you're still getting the protein versus some people are putting out there, swap an egg with a banana. It's like, no, the banana doesn't have the protein the egg has. So yeah, the egg whites are great. And they could be they're just a pure form of protein. So, and there's no cholesterol, no fat, no nothing in them. So it's just pure protein. So actually,
Yeah, and you can do the carton. I mean, the carton is usually, I believe it's pasteurized. So it's a little more processed as opposed to if you're using the egg white from the whole egg.
okay.
But if you can
That
find like,
was my question. Yes, thank you.
yeah, I would shoot for an organic, like carton one.
Okay,
eating
thanks
Jerry.
so much.
No, thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Any other questions, guys? Okay. But thank you for your time. And of course, thanks for signing up. We'll send that information out by tonight and have an awesome, awesome rest of your day and happy Valentine's Day tomorrow. All right. Bye,
Bye.
guys.